My name is Emily Taylor, and at 28, I thought I understood my family. Growing up, we were the picture of stability and trust. But one Sunday dinner changed everything. I was struggling financially, but too proud to ask for help. As we finished dessert, Dad casually asked, "Did that money?" I sent help with the bills. I looked at him confused. What money? The silence that followed was deafening. Dad froze mid-bite. I turned to Mom, whose face had drained of color. She could not even pretend. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are from. Hit subscribe, and stay for a story about family betrayal that changed everything I thought I knew about trust. The Taylors were what most would consider a typical middle-class American family. We lived in a comfortable 4-bedroom house, in a quiet suburb of Minneapolis, attended community events regularly, and maintained those traditional values of hard work, honesty, and family loyalty. My father Robert worked as a civil engineer for the city for over 25 years. He was the steady, reliable force in our family, the one who taught me how to change a tire file, my taxes, and stand up for myself. He was always my role model, the person I called first with good news or when I needed advice. My mother Margaret worked part-time as an administrative assistant at the local high school. She was more reserved, more difficult to read. Where Dad was open and expressive, Mom kept her thoughts and feelings close to her chest. We were cordial, even friendly, but there had always been a certain distance between us that I could never quite bridge. As a child, I gravitated naturally toward my father, who seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and dreams. Mom fulfilled her maternal duties without complaint, but there was always something slightly detached about her affection. After graduating from the University of Minnesota with a degree in marketing 3 years ago, I had been slowly building my career at North Star Communications, a small but growing marketing firm downtown. The job paid reasonably well for an entry-level position, but between my substantial student loans, the cost of living in the city, and the general expenses of adult life, I was just keeping my head above water financially. I had always been determined to make it on my own, without running back to my parents for help. Independence was a point of pride for me. Then about 6 months ago, everything seemed to fall apart at once. It started with an excruciating pain in my abdomen that sent me to the emergency room at 2 in the morning. An emergency appendectomy followed, and even with my company insurance, I was left with nearly $4,000 in out-of-pocket expenses. Just as I was working out a payment plan with the hospital, my 10-year-old Honda Civic decided it had had enough. The transmission went out completely, requiring a $2,000 repair that I simply could not afford. Public transportation in our city is decent, but added an hour each way to my commute. As if that were not enough, my landlord informed all tenants that due to property tax increases, rent would be going up by $300 per month when our leases renewed. Mine was coming up in just 60 days. I ran the numbers over and over, trying to find a way to make it all work. I cut every non-essential expense I could think of. My streaming services went first, followed by my gym membership. I started meal prepping simple dishes like rice and beans to reduce my grocery bill. I took on freelance work on evenings and weekends, designing logos and managing social media accounts for small businesses. Despite all these efforts, I was falling further behind each month. The medical bills went to collections, damaging my credit score. I was putting groceries on my credit card and only making minimum payments. The financial stress was taking a toll on my health and my work performance. There were nights I lay awake until dawn, calculating and recalculating, trying to find a mathematical solution that simply did not exist. Throughout all of this, I maintained my weekly appearances at Sunday family dinner. It was a tradition we had kept since I was a child, and one that became even more important once I moved into my own apartment. Every Sunday at 5 o'clock, I would arrive at my parents' house for a home-cooked meal and family time. During these dinners, we would catch up on each other's lives, discuss current events, and simply enjoy being together. I was careful never to mention my financial troubles during these gatherings. Part of it was pride, certainly. I wanted my parents to see me as a capable, independent adult. But there was also a deeper reason. My parents had already done so much for me, putting me through college and supporting me in countless ways. My father had worked so hard for so many years, and I knew they were focused on building their retirement savings. The last thing I wanted was to become a financial burden to them, just as they were preparing to enjoy the fruits of their decades of labor. So I smiled through Sunday dinners, assuring them that everything was fine when they asked about work and my apartment. I deflected questions about why I looked tired or had lost weight. I changed the subject when Dad asked if I was still going to that nice gym near my apartment, or when Mom noticed I was wearing the same clothes more frequently. I became quite skilled at steering conversations away from anything that might reveal my financial distress. What I did not realize was that my silence would not protect me from what was coming, and that my decision not to ask for help would soon expose a family secret I never could have imagined. That particular Sunday started like any other. I arrived at my parents' suburban home just before 5, parking my now functioning but still temperamental Honda at the curb. The early October air had a crisp autumnal feel to it, and the maple trees that lined our street were showing the first hints of gold and crimson. I paused on the front walkway, taking in the familiar sight of the 2-story colonial where I had grown up. The porch light was already on, though the sun was just beginning to set, and through the front window I could see movement in the kitchen. I let myself in with my key, calling out, "I am here," as I hung my jacket on the coat rack in the entryway. The house smelled amazing, like roasted chicken and fresh baked rolls. My stomach growled audibly, reminding me that I had skipped lunch to save money, having only a cup of coffee and an apple at my desk, while I finished some overdue work reports. Dad emerged from the living room, remote control still in hand. The football game was on but muted. He gave me a warm hug, his familiar aftershave bringing back memories of him getting ready for work when I was little, sitting on the edge of the bathtub watching him shave. "There she is," he said with a smile. "How is my favorite daughter doing today?" I rolled my eyes at our old joke, as I was his only daughter. "Still, your only daughter, Dad, so the competition is not exactly fierce." He laughed and guided me toward the kitchen where Mom was putting the finishing touches on dinner. She was wearing an apron over a new-looking blouse I had not seen before, her hair freshly styled in a way that suggested she had recently visited a salon. She glanced up as we entered, offering a quick smile before returning her attention to the gravy she was stirring. "Hi, Mom," I said, moving to give her a hug. She accepted it somewhat stiffly, patting my back with her free hand. "Hello, dear. Dinner is almost ready. Would you mind setting the table? Everything is already on the dining room sideboard." I nodded and went to arrange the place settings, noting that Mom had used the good china, which was usually reserved for holidays or special occasions. When I mentioned this, Dad shrugged. "Your mother was in the mood to spruce things up a bit. Nothing wrong with making Sunday dinner a little special, right?" There was something in his tone that struck me as odd, a forced casualness that did not quite ring true. I glanced between my parents, noticing a certain tension in the way they moved around each other, like dancers slightly out of sync. Mom seemed more distracted than usual, checking and rechecking things that were already done. Dad was overly cheerful, filling silences with comments about the football game or the unusually warm weather we had been having. Once we were seated and had filled our plates, the conversation flowed more naturally. Dad asked about my job, and I shared an amusing story about a client who had accidentally approved the wrong draft of an advertisement, resulting in a scramble to pull it before publication. Mom asked about my apartment, and I carefully steered the conversation toward my neighbor's noisy dog, rather than the impending rent increase I could not afford. Throughout the meal, I noticed that Mom was quieter than usual, contributing little to the conversation and seeming lost in thought. Occasionally, I would catch Dad giving her puzzled glances, which she either did not notice or chose to ignore. I dismissed it as one of their minor marital disagreements, the kind all couples have from time to time. As we finished the main course, Dad refilled his wine glass and leaned back in his chair, appearing to relax a bit. "So, Emily, How have things been going with those bills you were worried about? Did that money I sent help? I paused my fork halfway to my mouth, a piece of roasted carrot suspended in midair. What money? I asked, genuinely confused. The change in the atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. Dad froze, his wine glass still tilted slightly, not quite returning to the table. His eyes widened, and a look of bewilderment crossed his face. Slowly, deliberately, he set down his glass and turned to look at Mom. I followed his gaze. My mother had suddenly become intensely interested in arranging and rearranging the food on her plate. Her shoulders were hunched forward slightly, and a flush was spreading from her neck to her cheeks. She did not look up, could not meet either of our eyes. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Oh, I must be confused," he said, his voice strained and unnatural. "I was thinking about, your birthday check from last month." But his birthday gift to me had been a nice dinner out, not money, and my birthday was in April, not September. The excuse made no sense, and from the look on his face, he knew it too. I set my fork down carefully, looking between my parents. "What money are you talking about, Dad?" Dad's expression shifted from confusion to something harder, more focused. He was looking directly at Mom now, who still had not raised her head. "Margaret," he said, his voice soft, but with an edge I had rarely heard him use with her. "What is going on?" Mom's hands trembled slightly as she set down her own utensils. She smoothed her napkin in her lap, a nervous gesture I had seen countless times throughout my childhood. "It is nothing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just a misunderstanding." "What kind of misunderstanding involves money you apparently never gave to our daughter?" Dad pressed his confusion, giving way to something that looked alarmingly like suspicion. I felt suddenly as though I had stepped into someone else's family drama, like I was watching a play where I did not know my lines. "Can someone please tell me what is happening right now?" I asked, my appetite completely gone. Dad took a deep breath, then turned to face me directly. "Emily, about 3 weeks ago, I gave your mother $5,000 to send to you, for your medical bills and car repairs." He spoke slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving my face. "She told me you were too proud to accept it directly from me, but that she had worked it out with you. That you had agreed to take it, if it came from her account as a loan you could pay back over time." The room seemed to tilt slightly. I looked at my mother, who was now staring fixedly at a point somewhere over my left shoulder. "Mom," I said, my voice sounding strange, even to my own ears. "Is that true? Did Dad give you money for me?" Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. She gave a tiny nod, still not meeting my eyes. "But I never received any money," I said, still struggling to process what was happening, "and we never had any conversation about a loan." "I was going to give it to you," Mom said quickly. "I just have not had the chance yet." 3 weeks, Dad said flatly. "You have had 3 weeks, Margaret. And you told me specifically that you had already transferred it to her account." Mom's face crumpled slightly, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and finally looked at Dad. "I needed it for some things," she said. "Important things. I was going to replace it before anyone noticed." "Before anyone noticed," Dad repeated incredulously. "It was $5,000, Margaret. How exactly were you planning to replace that without me noticing?" As they argued, pieces began falling into place in my mind. Mom's new blouse, her freshly styled hair, the good china for an ordinary Sunday dinner, as if to distract us or create a pleasant atmosphere. And suddenly I remembered something else. About a month ago, she had called me mid-week asking detailed questions about my medical bills and car problems. At the time, I had thought she was just showing unusual interest in my life. Now I realized she had been gathering information to relay to Dad, making him believe I had confided in her rather than him. "What did you spend it on?" I asked, cutting through their escalating argument. $5,000. That was meant to help me when I really needed it. What was so important? Mom looked trapped, her eyes darting between Dad and me, as if searching for an escape route. Finally she sighed. I spent some of it on a spa weekend with Aunt Judith. The rest went toward some clothes and shoes I needed, and a deposit for our anniversary trip. A spa weekend, I repeated, disbelief coloring my voice. While I have been eating ramen noodles for dinner 4 nights a week and taking the bus in the rain because I cannot afford to fix my car. I work hard too, Emily, Mom said defensively. I deserve nice things sometimes. Not with money that was meant for our daughter's medical bills, Dad exclaimed, pushing back from the table with enough force that the water glasses wobbled precariously. I cannot believe you would do this, Margaret. To our own child. The dinner had completely fallen apart. Dad was pacing now, running his hands through his hair in that way he did when truly upset. Mom sat rigid in her chair, a strange combination of defiance and shame on her face. And I felt as though the floor had opened up beneath me, revealing that the solid ground I thought I stood on had been an illusion all along. I stood up shakily. I think I should go, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Emily, wait, Dad said, moving toward me. This is not your fault. We need to talk about this. Not right now, I said already, backing toward the door. I need some time to process this. Emily, please, Mom called after me, finally showing real emotion. Let me explain. But I was already grabbing my jacket, fumbling with the door handle. I needed airspace distance from this revelation. I mumbled something about calling them later, and practically ran to my car. As I drove home through the darkening evening, tears streamed down my face. I felt doubly betrayed. Not only had my mother stolen money that was meant to help me through a genuine crisis, but she had also been willing to let me continue struggling, rather than admit what she had done. How many nights had I lain awake, terrified about my mounting debt, while she enjoyed spa treatments, and shopped for new clothes, with money that was intended to ease my burden. By the time I reached my apartment, a new emotion had joined the hurt and betrayal. Anger, white-hot and clarifying. For perhaps the first time in my life, I was truly deeply angry at my mother. The next morning, I woke to find 17 missed calls and 23 text messages on my phone. Most were from Dad expressing concern and asking me to call him. There were only 3 from Mom, each one increasingly defensive in tone, explaining that I did not understand the whole situation, and that she had been planning to give me the money eventually. I could not bring myself to respond to either of them. Instead, I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, despite my financial situation, making every sick day a luxury I could ill afford. But I knew I would not be able to focus on client proposals or marketing strategies with my family situation weighing so heavily on my mind. I spent most of the morning in a daze, replaying the previous night's dinner over and over, trying to make sense of what had happened. Around noon, my phone rang again. It was Dad. After letting it go to voicemail 4 times, I finally answered on the 5th call. Emily, thank goodness, he said, relief evident in his voice. Are you okay? I have been worried sick about you. I am fine, I said flatly, though I was anything but. Just trying to process everything. I know, sweetheart. I am so sorry about what happened. I had no idea your mother would do something like this. I sank onto my worn couch, pulling a throw blanket around my shoulders despite the apartment being fairly warm. Did you talk to her after I left? Dad sighed heavily. Yes. We had a long conversation. Or rather, I did a lot of talking and she did a lot of evading. But some things came out that, well, that you should know about. A sense of dread settled in my stomach. What things? It would be better to discuss this in person. Could you meet me for lunch? Not at the house. Somewhere neutral. 2 hours later, I was sitting across from my father at a quiet corner table in Franklin's, a diner we had frequented when I was growing up. Dad looked like he had aged years overnight, with dark circles under his eyes and new lines etched around his mouth. After ordering coffee for both of us, he reached across the table and took my hand. Emily, I need to tell you something that is going to be difficult to hear. After you left last night, your mother and I had a massive argument. I demanded to know exactly what had happened to the money, and she finally broke down and told me everything." He paused, taking a deep breath. "This was not the first time she has intercepted money meant for you." I felt as though I had been punched in the stomach. "What do you mean?" "Over the years, there have been numerous occasions when I gave money to your mother to pass along to you. Birthday gifts, Christmas presents, graduation money. Small amounts here and there that I thought would help you out, or just be a nice surprise. She always told me you had received it, and were grateful." My mind raced back through countless birthdays and holidays, trying to recall any mention of money from my father that had never materialized. There had been times when Dad had referenced a gift, and I had thanked him vaguely, assuming he meant a different present, or was misremembering. "How much?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dad shook his head. "I cannot say for certain. The 5,000 was by far the largest amount, but over the years, it could easily be several thousand more." "But why would she do this? We are not poor. You both have good jobs. What would make her steal from her own daughter?" Dad rotated his coffee cup slowly between his palms. "Your mother confessed last night that she has been struggling with a shopping addiction for years. Clothes, shoes, jewelry, home decor. She hides purchases from me, maintains credit cards I do not know about. When I confronted her about the $5,000, it all came pouring out." I sat back stunned. A shopping addiction. But Mom always seemed so practical, so frugal even. That was the image she cultivated. Yes. But apparently, it was just that, an image. In reality, she has been spending compulsively for years, and going to great lengths to hide it from both of us. As this information sank in, another thought occurred to me. Dad, if she has been taking money meant for me for years, why ask about it now? Why mention the money at dinner last night? Dad's expression darkened. "Because I was suspicious. The amount was much larger than usual, and I wanted to make sure it had actually reached you. When I asked your mother for confirmation that you had received it, she was evasive, so I decided to bring it up directly with you, hoping she was just being forgetful." "You suspected she was lying," I said quietly. "I suspected something was off," he corrected. "I never imagined she would actually withhold money that was meant to help you through a genuine crisis." I thought back to the dinner, to Mom's stiff posture, and inability to meet my eyes. She did not even seem that sorry, just embarrassed at being caught. Dad was silent for a moment. "There is more, Emily. Something else she admitted last night that I think helps explain, though certainly not excuse, her behavior." I braced myself, wondering what other revelation could possibly follow. "What is it?" "Your mother told me that she has always been jealous of our relationship, of the bond you and I share. She resented being the practical parent, the disciplinarian, while I got to be the fun one you always ran to with your problems and achievements." I shook my head in disbelief. "That is ridiculous. She chose to be distant. She chose to keep me at arm's length emotionally." "I know it seems that way," Dad said gently. "And I am not defending her actions in any way. What she did was inexcusable. But she claimed that taking the money was in some twisted way her attempt to insert herself into our relationship, to be the one controlling the financial support that came from me to you." "That is sick," I said, anger flaring again, "and completely unfair to both of us." "Yes, it is," Dad agreed. "I told her as much. I also told her that she needs professional help, and that our marriage depends on her getting it." We sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, I looked up at my father. "What happens now?" "That depends partly on you," he said. "I have told your mother that she needs to come clean to you completely, to apologize sincerely, and to return the money immediately. I have also insisted that she begin therapy for her shopping addiction. As for me, I am staying at Uncle Jack's place for a while. I need some space to think about everything." The realization that my parents might separate because of this hit me hard. Despite the anger I felt toward my mother, The thought of my family breaking apart was painful. "This is not your fault," Emily, Dad said, seeming to read my thoughts. "None of this is your fault. Your mother made her choices, and now she has to face the consequences." As we finished our coffee and prepared to leave, Dad handed me an envelope. "This is a check for $7,000, he said. $5,000 to cover what your mother took, plus an additional $2,000 to help you get back on your feet. I have opened a new account that only I have access to, so there is no chance of this happening again." I took the envelope, tears welling in my eyes. "Thank you, Dad. But I feel terrible about all of this. About you and Mom." He squeezed my hand. "This has been building for a long time, sweetheart. Your mother and I have had problems for years that we have both ignored. In a strange way, this situation might be the wake-up call we both needed." As I drove back to my apartment, the envelope tucked securely in my purse, I felt overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. Relief at the financial lifeline my father had thrown me. Anger at my mother's betrayal. Sadness at the fracturing of my family. And beneath it all, a lingering sense of disbelief that the mother I had known all my life could have been hiding such secrets. For the next 5 days I avoided my mother completely. I sent my father brief text messages letting him know I was okay, but I could not bring myself to engage with either of them fully. I needed time to process everything I had learned, to come to terms with this new reality, where my mother was not the person I had always believed her to be. My phone continued to fill with messages from both parents. Dad's were respectful of my space, while still expressing concern. Mom's grew increasingly desperate and self-justifying. "You do not understand how hard it has been for me," one message read. "I have needs too that no one in this family ever considers." That particular message sent a spike of rage through me so intense that I nearly threw my phone across the room. The audacity of her playing the victim while I had been drowning in debt-skipping meals and losing sleep over financial stress was almost too much to bear. On the 6th day after the fateful dinner, I finally responded to one of her messages agreeing to meet for coffee at a cafe halfway between our homes. I chose a public location deliberately knowing my own temper and not trusting hers. I arrived early, selecting a table in the corner, where we would have some privacy without being completely isolated. Mom arrived 10 minutes late, looking simultaneously defiant and diminished. She had made an effort with her appearance, wearing a stylish outfit I suspected was new, which struck me as tone-deaf given the circumstances. She slid into the seat across from me, setting her designer handbag on the empty chair beside her. "Thank you for meeting me," she began, her voice softer than usual. "I have been so worried about you." "Have you?" I asked coolly. "Worried about me, or worried about what Dad and I now know about you?" She flinched slightly, but recovered quickly. "That is not fair, Emily. I have always cared about your well-being." "Really? Because from where I am sitting, it looks like you cared more about spa weekends and new clothes than about the fact that your daughter could not afford to pay her medical bills." Mom's lips thinned. "It was not like that. I was going to give you the money eventually. When after my bills went to collections, after my credit was ruined, after I got evicted from my apartment, because I could not afford the rent increase." "You never told me things were that bad," she countered. "You always acted like everything was fine." I leaned forward, keeping my voice low, but intense. "Because I was trying to be independent. I was trying not to burden you and Dad. But he figured out I was struggling anyway because he pays attention. He notices things. And he tried to help me, except you intercepted that help and used it for yourself." Mom looked down at her untouched coffee. "I made a mistake. I admit that. But you have no idea what it is like to be me. To always be the practical one, the responsible one, while your father gets to be the hero. To watch my daughter run to him with every problem and achievement, while barely acknowledging my existence." "That is not true," I protested, though, even as I said it, I wondered if there might be a grain of truth there. Had I favored Dad so obviously that Mom felt excluded? Still, That hardly justified her actions. Isn't it? She challenged. When was the last time you called me just to chat? When was the last time you asked for my advice, or shared good news with me first? It is always Robert this, Dad that. I have been your mother for 28 years, but sometimes I feel like little more than a housekeeper in your eyes. I was momentarily taken aback by the raw emotion in her voice. This was more vulnerability than my mother had shown in years, possibly ever. But then I remembered why we were having this conversation in the first place. Even if that were true, it would not justify stealing money that was meant to help me when I was in genuine need. Do you have any idea how stressed I have been? How scared I have been, working 60-hour weeks between my regular job and freelance work, eating ramen noodles for dinner, taking the bus in the rain, all while you were getting massages and buying new outfits with money that was meant for me. Mom had the grace to look ashamed. I know it was wrong. I did not think it through. I saw the money in the account, and I had been wanting to do this spa weekend with Judith for months, and I told myself I would replace it before you ever needed to know. And was that the first time Dad tells me you have been intercepting money from him to me for years? She shifted uncomfortably. It was not like that in the beginning. The first time was an accident. He gave me birthday money for you when you were in college, and I put it in my purse intending to deposit it in your account. But then I saw a pair of shoes I had been wanting, and I told myself I would replace the money from my next paycheck, but then there were other expenses and I never got around to it. After that, it just got easier each time. The casual way she described the pattern of deception made my blood boil. So you have been systematically stealing from me for years, and you would have continued if Dad had not caught you. I have a problem, she admitted quietly. A shopping addiction. I cannot seem to control it. I get this rush when I buy something new, but then I feel guilty, so I hide the purchases and the receipts. Your father does not understand. He is so careful with money, so responsible. He would never understand the compulsion. That does not excuse what you did to me, I said firmly. You let me struggle financially, let me stress and worry, while you used money meant for me to feed your addiction. Mom's eyes filled with tears. I know, and I am sorry, Emily. Truly sorry. I never meant to hurt you. But you did hurt me, and not just financially. You betrayed my trust. You made me question everything I thought I knew about our family. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of years of deception hanging between us. Finally, Mom reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. This is $5,500, she said, sliding it across the table. The original amount plus a bit extra for the trouble I caused. I sold some of my jewelry to get it. I looked at the envelope but did not touch it. Dad already gave me money to cover what you took. He said he opened a new account that only he has access to. A flash of something hurt or perhaps anger crossed her face. Of course he did. Robert to the rescue as always. Do not do that, I said sharply. Do not make Dad the villain here because he stepped up to fix the mess you created. Mom looked away. You are right. I am sorry. She pushed the envelope closer to me. Take it anyway. Use it to pay him back or save it or whatever you want. It is yours. It should have been yours all along. I finally took the envelope, tucking it into my bag. Thank you. But money does not fix the breach of trust, Mom. I do not know if or when I will be able to trust you again. I understand, she said softly. I am seeing a therapist now, starting next week. Your father insisted and he is right. I need help. Yes, you do, I agreed. And, not just for the shopping addiction. We need to address why you felt justified in taking from your own daughter, why you were willing to let me struggle, rather than admit what you had done. Mom nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. Will you give me another chance, Emily? Not right away. I know it is too soon for that. But eventually I do not want to lose my daughter over this. I considered her question carefully. Part of me wanted to forgive her to repair our relationship and move forward. But another part, the part still raw with betrayal, was not ready to offer absolution so easily. "I need time," I said finally. "Time and evidence that you are genuinely changing, not just saying what you think I want to hear. For now, I think we should take a break from our usual contact. No Sunday dinners, no casual phone calls. When I am ready to talk again, I will reach out." The pain in her eyes was evident, but she nodded in acceptance. "I understand, and I will respect your boundaries. Just know that I love you, Emily, despite my terrible mistakes." As we prepared to leave, she asked hesitantly, "Will you be at Grandma's birthday celebration next month? The whole family will be there." "I do not know," I answered honestly. "Right now, the thought of pretending everything is normal with the extended family is more than I can handle. But I will think about it." I walked out of the cafe, feeling emotionally drained, but also strangely lighter, as if setting clear boundaries with my mother had lifted a weight I had not realized I was carrying. The road ahead would be difficult, our relationship forever altered by what had happened. But for perhaps the first time in my life, I was seeing my mother clearly not as the infallible parent of childhood, but as a deeply flawed human being with her own struggles and weaknesses. It was a painful revelation, but also, in its own way, a necessary step toward adulthood. The following weekend I met with my father at a park near his brother's house, where he was temporarily staying. We walked along a tree-lined path, the fall colors providing a beautiful backdrop to our difficult conversation. "How are you holding up?" I asked him, noticing the strain still evident in his face. "Taking it day by day," he replied. "It is strange being away from the house after 30 years of marriage, but I need this space to think clearly." "Are you and Mom talking at all?" Dad nodded. "We had a long conversation yesterday. She has started seeing a therapist, Dr. Winters. She had her first session on Tuesday." "That is good, I guess," I said, kicking at a pile of fallen leaves. "Do you think it will help?" "I hope so. But I am also discovering that there were financial discrepancies I ignored for years, credit card statements I never examined closely, purchases that seemed excessive but that I never questioned because I trusted your mother implicitly." I glanced at him. "How bad is it?" He sighed heavily. "She has nearly $20,000 in credit card debt that I knew nothing about, multiple accounts. And she has been using our joint savings to make minimum payments, which explains why that account never seemed to grow as much as it should have given our incomes." "Dad, that is serious," I said, alarmed at the figure. "What are you going to do?" "I have consulted with a financial advisor to create a debt management plan, and I have been clear with your mother that any reconciliation depends on complete financial transparency moving forward. No more secret accounts, no more hidden purchases." We walked in silence for a few minutes, the implications of his words sinking in. My parents' marriage was in genuine jeopardy, their financial future compromised by my mother's deception and addiction. "This is not your fault," Emily, Dad said, seeming to read my thoughts again. "Your mother's issues have been building for years. The situation with you and the $5,000 was just the breaking point that forced everything into the open. But if I had been more open about my financial struggles, if I had not been so determined to handle everything on my own, maybe this would have come to light sooner in a less dramatic way." Dad stopped walking and turned to face me. "Listen to me. You have done nothing wrong. Being independent and trying to make it on your own are admirable traits. Your mother made her choices, and now we all have to deal with the consequences." 3 days later, the family grapevine began buzzing. My father's absence from the family home had not gone unnoticed, and once Aunt Judith, Mom's sister and spa companion, learned of the situation, word spread quickly through the extended family. The calls and texts started flowing in. From my grandmother worried about her son and daughter-in-law's marriage, from aunts and uncles offering unsolicited advice, from cousins curious about the family drama. Everyone seemed to have an opinion about what should happen next. Most surprisingly, many family members seemed to expect me to simply forgive and forget to reconcile with my mother immediately, for the sake of family harmony. My mother's side of the family was particularly vocal about this, suggesting that I was being overly dramatic about just money, and that family loyalty should supersede any temporary hurt feelings. "You need to be the bigger person here," Aunt Judith told me, during an uncomfortable phone call. "Your mother made a mistake, but she is still your mother. She gave you life. She raised you. You owe her your forgiveness." "I do not owe anyone forgiveness on their timetable," I replied, trying to keep my voice level. What happened was not a simple mistake. It was a deliberate pattern of deception that hurt me financially and emotionally. "We all do things we regret," she persisted. "And your grandmother's 80th birthday is coming up next month. She wants the whole family there, including you and your parents together. Surely you can put aside your differences for one day, for her sake." The pressure to reconcile quickly, to sweep the whole messy situation under the rug for the sake of appearances, was intense. Even some family members who acknowledged the seriousness of what my mother had done seemed more concerned with restoring the illusion of family harmony than with addressing the underlying issues. My father, thankfully, was firmly in my corner. "Take all the time you need," he assured me. "Real reconciliation cannot be rushed or forced. And anyone who pressures you to get over it for the sake of a party does not understand the depth of the betrayal you experienced." As the weeks passed, the family divide deepened. My father and I on one side, my mother and much of her family on the other. There were those who tried to remain neutral, of course, but family gatherings became complicated negotiations about who would attend if whom else was present. The approaching milestone of my grandmother's birthday created additional stress. As the date drew nearer, the pressure to attend to play happy family for a day intensified. My grandmother, who I loved dearly, called me personally to request my presence. "I understand you and your mother are having problems," she said in her gentle but firm way. "And I am not asking you to pretend those problems do not exist. But I am asking you to be in the same room with her for a few hours for my sake. You are both so precious to me, and I do not know how many more birthdays I will have with my family around me." It was a request I found difficult to refuse, despite my ongoing anger and hurt. After much thought, I agreed to attend with the understanding that I would not be pressured to interact with my mother beyond basic civility. The party itself was as awkward as I had feared. My mother made repeated attempts to engage me in conversation, to create an appearance of reconciliation for the benefit of watching relatives. I maintained a polite but distant demeanor, engaging minimally and focusing my attention on my grandmother and other family members. "She is really trying. You know my cousin," Rachel commented as we stood by the dessert table. "Aunt Margaret seems genuinely sorry." "I am sure she is sorry she got caught," I replied more sharply than I intended. But being sorry and making genuine amends are two different things. Rachel looked taken aback. "Wow, I have never seen you this hard before, Emily. You have always been so forgiving." "This is different," I said, setting down my plate. "And unless you have had a parent steal from you while you were struggling financially, then lie about it for years. I do not think you can understand how I feel right now." As I drove home from the party, I reflected on how differently I was behaving, how much more firmly I was establishing my boundaries. 6 months ago, I would have caved to the family pressure, accepted a surface-level apology, and pretended everything was fine to avoid rocking the boat. But something had shifted in me. The betrayal had awakened a strength I had not known. I possessed a willingness to stand my ground, even when it created discomfort for others. It was not a comfortable realization. I had always seen myself as a peacemaker, someone who valued harmony and connection. But I was learning that sometimes peace comes at too high a price, and that genuine connection cannot be built on a foundation of deception and manipulation. That night, I called my father. "How do you think it went?" I asked, curled up on my couch with a cup of tea. "About as well as could be expected," he replied. "Your grandmother was happy to have everyone there, which was the main thing." Mom tried to corner me several times, I said. She kept trying to create these little moments of reconciliation for everyone to see. Dad sighed. That sounds like her. She has always been concerned with appearances. Is that why you stayed married to her for so long? To maintain appearances? There was a long pause. That is part of it, he admitted finally. But it is more complicated than that. We have history, shared memories, years of building a life together. Walking away from that is not easy, even when trust has been broken. Are you going to reconcile with her? I asked, voicing the question that had been on my mind for weeks. I honestly do not know, he said. She is making an effort with therapy. She has given me access to all her financial accounts. She seems genuinely remorseful, but trust once broken is very difficult to rebuild. I know, I said softly. I am experiencing that firsthand. Whatever happens between your mother and me, Dad said, do not let it dictate your own relationship with her. You need to make that decision based on what is right for you, not on what I do or what the rest of the family thinks you should do. His words stayed with me in the days that followed, as I navigated this new reality, where family gatherings were minefields, and long-held assumptions about trust and loyalty had been upended. I was discovering that family relationships, like all relationships, require constant tending and evaluation. That love, while important, is not always enough. That sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is create distance from those who have hurt you, even if they share your blood. It was a painful lesson, but one that would serve me well in the months to come. 3 months after the fateful Sunday dinner, much had changed in my life. The financial assistance from my father, combined with the money my mother had returned, had allowed me to catch up on my medical bills and car payments. My credit score, while still not excellent, was slowly recovering from the damage done by the collections accounts. More significantly, the entire experience had pushed me to be more proactive about my career and financial situation. I had applied for a promotion at work that I might previously have considered beyond my reach, making a compelling case for why I deserved the senior marketing coordinator position, despite having been with the company for only 3 years. To my surprise and delight, I got the job, which came with a significant salary increase. The additional income allowed me to begin building an emergency fund for the first time in my adult life, providing a buffer against future unexpected expenses. I had also made the difficult decision to move out of my expensive downtown apartment when the lease ended. My new place was a bit farther from work, but significantly more affordable, and I had found a roommate, Allison, a graphic designer I had met through a mutual friend, to share the costs. The arrangement was working out well both financially and socially, giving me both more breathing room in my budget and regular companionship during what had been a lonely and difficult time. My relationship with my parents remained complicated. Dad had moved back into the family home after 2 months at his brother's place, but he made it clear to both Mom and me that this was a trial reconciliation, not a permanent resolution. Your mother is doing the work, he told me during one of our regular lunch meetings. She has been consistent with therapy. She is being transparent about her spending. She is making a genuine effort. Do you trust her again? I asked. He considered the question carefully. I am learning to trust her again in small steps. It is a process, not an event. Mom and I had established a cautious, limited relationship. We spoke on the phone once a week. Conversations that were initially stilted and uncomfortable, but gradually becoming more natural. She continued to express remorse for her actions, but more importantly, she seemed to be developing a greater understanding of why what she had done was so harmful. Dr. Winters is helping me see how my own insecurities and jealousies fed into my behavior, she told me during one of our calls. I was so focused on what I perceived as unfairness in our family dynamic that I justified doing something terribly unfair to you. The irony of that is not lost on me now. She had also, at her therapist's suggestion, begun attending Debtors Anonymous meetings, where she was confronting her shopping addiction with the support of others who struggled with similar issues. It helps to know I am not alone, she said. To hear other people talk about the same compulsions, the same patterns of deception, the same consequences. It makes me feel less like a monster, and more like someone with a real problem that can be addressed. I appreciated her efforts, though I remained cautious. Words were easy, sustained change was harder. I needed to see a consistent pattern of honest behavior before I could fully trust her again. In early February, nearly 4 months after the revelation, Mom suggested something unexpected during our weekly call. "I have been talking with Dr. Winters about family therapy," she said. "She thinks it might be helpful for the three of us, you, me, and your father, to have some sessions together, to work through the damage that has been done to our family relationships." My immediate instinct was to refuse. The thought of sitting in a therapy session exposing my raw feelings about my mother's betrayal while she was present was deeply uncomfortable. But after discussing it with my own therapist, whom I had started seeing to help process the family trauma, I reluctantly agreed to at least one session. "You can always decide not to continue if it feels unproductive or too painful," my therapist reminded me. "But it might provide an opportunity for guided conversation that could be healing for all of you." The first family therapy session was as difficult as I had anticipated. Sitting in Dr. Winter's comfortable office, the three of us arranged in a triangle of separate chairs felt both formal and intensely personal. Mom was nervous, fidgeting with her wedding ring constantly. Dad was stoic but tense, his jaw tight, and I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I rarely allowed myself to be with my parents. Dr. Winters began by establishing ground rules: no interrupting, no personal attacks, an agreement to speak honestly, but with consideration for others' feelings. Then she invited each of us to share our perspective on what had happened and how it had affected us. Dad spoke of his shock and disappointment, of the struggle to reconcile the woman he thought he had married with the person capable of such deception. Mom talked about her shame, her addiction, her jealousy of the father-daughter bond she felt excluded from, and I spoke of my sense of betrayal, my anger, my difficulty, trusting not just my mother, but my own judgment about people. As the session progressed, deeper family dynamics began to emerge, patterns that had been established decades ago and never questioned. The way Dad and I naturally gravitated toward each other, while Mom remained somewhat on the outside. The unspoken expectations and assumptions that had shaped our interactions for years. "It sounds like there have been communication problems in this family that long predate the financial deception," Dr. Winters observed. "Patterns of inclusion and exclusion of things, left unsaid, of needs unexpressed or unmet." It was a painful realization that our family dysfunction had roots that went beyond my mother's recent actions, that in small ways, we had all contributed to a family system that was not as healthy as I had always believed it to be. "This does not excuse what your mother did," Dr. Winters clarified, seeing my expression. "Her actions were her responsibility alone. But understanding the context might help all of you create healthier patterns moving forward." We agreed to continue the family sessions, meeting every other week, while also maintaining our individual therapy appointments. It was exhausting, emotionally draining work, but gradually I began to see small shifts in how we related to each other. Mom became more direct in expressing her needs and feelings, rather than harboring resentments. Dad made more effort to include her in decisions and conversations, and I found myself able to see my mother with more compassion, not excusing her actions, but beginning to understand the complex factors that had contributed to them. By March, we had established a new Sunday tradition, meeting for brunch at a restaurant rather than dinner at my parents' home. The neutral territory and public setting seemed to help keep our interactions civil and prevent old patterns from reasserting themselves too strongly. During one such brunch, Mom handed me an envelope. "This is the final restitution payment," she said, "with interest." I had already received several installments, as she sold items from her extensive wardrobe and jewelry collection, making good on her promise to repay everything she had taken from me over the years. "Thank you," I said, accepting the envelope. "I appreciate your commitment to making this right financially." "I know money cannot fix the breach of trust," she said, echoing my own words from months earlier. "But I hope it is a tangible sign that I am serious about change." I nodded, recognizing the genuine effort behind the gesture. "It helps," I acknowledged. "It is a start." As spring approached, bringing with it a sense of renewal and possibility, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in 6 months. The betrayal had been painful, devastating in the moment. But it had also been clarifying, forcing issues into the open that might otherwise have remained buried for years. I had discovered my own strength and resilience. I had learned to establish and maintain boundaries even when doing so created discomfort. I had begun building a more stable financial foundation for myself. And though my relationship with my mother would never be the same, there was hope that it might eventually become something new, something more authentic than what had existed before. It was not the path I would have chosen, but I was beginning to see that sometimes the most painful experiences can also be the most transformative. 1 year after the Sunday dinner that changed everything, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. I had moved again, this time to a place of my own that I could comfortably afford thanks to another promotion at work. The view was not spectacular, just a quiet residential street, lined with trees beginning to bud with spring growth, but it was mine, paid for with my own hard-earned money. So much had changed in 12 months. The raw wound of betrayal had gradually healed into a scar, still visible, still tender, when pressed, but no longer the open bleeding injury it had once been. My relationship with my parents had transformed, not back to what it was before, that was impossible, but into something new, that in some ways was actually healthier. My mother and I maintained regular contact, our weekly phone calls, supplemented by monthly lunches, just the two of us. We had established clear boundaries around certain topics, particularly money. Any financial transactions between us, even small ones, like splitting a lunch check, were handled with complete transparency. No more "I will get this, you get the next one." Everything was documented, clear, above board. It might seem cold or overly formal to an outsider, but for us it was necessary. Trust once shattered could only be rebuilt with these kinds of structures in place. And somewhat surprisingly, the very clarity of these boundaries had allowed us to relax more in other areas of our relationship. My parents remained together, their marriage altered, but surviving. Dad had insisted on joint financial counseling as a condition of reconciliation, and they now managed their money with a level of communication and transparency they had never had before. Mom continued her therapy and Debtors Anonymous meetings, maintaining her sobriety from compulsive shopping one day at a time. "It is like being an alcoholic," she explained to me once. "The urge never completely goes away. I still feel that pull when I see a beautiful pair of shoes or a new handbag. But I have tools now to recognize the impulse and choose differently." Our family therapy sessions had continued for 6 months before tapering off to occasional check-ins. Those sessions had revealed family dynamics I had never consciously recognized before, patterns established in my childhood that had shaped all our relationships. I learned that my mother's distance, which I had always interpreted as lack of interest or affection, was partially a response to what she perceived as my preference for my father. As a child, I had naturally gravitated toward Dad's warm, demonstrative personality, inadvertently sending Mom the message that I valued him more. She had responded by pulling back, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of distance that grew over the years. This understanding did not excuse her actions, as Dr. Winters repeatedly emphasized. Explanation is not justification became something of a mantra in our sessions. But it did help me view our family history with more nuance, to see how we had all contributed to the dynamics that eventually led to such a profound breach of trust. Perhaps the most significant change was in my own sense of self. The betrayal had forced me to become more independent, not just financially, but emotionally. I had learned to trust my instincts, to establish healthy boundaries, and to prioritize my own well-being even when doing so created discomfort for others. My friendship circle had evolved as well. Some friends had drifted away during the months when I was preoccupied with family drama and working long hours to stabilize my finances. But others had stepped up, offering support and understanding when I needed it most. Rachel, a colleague who had become a close friend, had been particularly steadfast, listening without judgment as I processed my feelings about my mother's betrayal. "You know what is strange," I said to her during a hike in the state park one weekend. "In some ways, I am actually grateful for what happened." Rachel looked at me in surprise. "Grateful that your mom stole from you?" "Not for that specific action," I clarified, "but for the wake-up call it provided." I was coasting before accepting financial insecurity, tolerating unhealthy family dynamics, avoiding difficult conversations. The betrayal forced me to change all of that. It made me stronger, more assertive, more honest with myself and others. "Silver linings from dark clouds," Rachel nodded. "But I am still sorry you had to go through all that pain to get here." "Me too," I admitted. "But I am not sure I would change it now, even if I could. The person I am today, the life I have built, the relationships I have now, they are all more authentic because of what happened." That authenticity extended to my relationship with my father as well. Our bond remained strong, but it had evolved from the somewhat idealized father-daughter dynamic of my childhood to a more equal adult relationship. I could now see his flaws and limitations, as well as his strengths, appreciate him as a complex human being rather than placing him on a pedestal. He had his own regrets about what had happened. "I should have been more attentive," he told me during one of our regular lunch meetings. "I should have noticed the signs," questioned the discrepancies. "I was so caught up in work and my own concerns that I missed what was happening right in front of me." "We all missed things," I reminded him. None of us were seeing the whole picture. As the 1-year anniversary of the revelation approached, Mom suggested a family dinner at their home, a deliberate echo of the fateful meal that had exposed her deception. I was hesitant at first, unsure whether revisiting the scene would be healing or simply reopen old wounds. But after discussing it with my therapist, I agreed. "It could provide a sense of closure," she suggested. "A way to acknowledge how far you have all come in a year." The dinner was surprisingly pleasant, the three of us moving around each other with a new awareness, a conscious effort to communicate clearly and honestly. We did not ignore what had happened, actually briefly acknowledging the anniversary, but neither did we dwell on it. It was simply part of our shared history, now a painful chapter, but not the whole story. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the lessons I had learned through this difficult journey, the importance of honesty, even when it is uncomfortable, the necessity of confronting problems directly, rather than allowing them to fester, the value of setting clear boundaries and expectations in relationships, the possibility of forgiveness that does not require forgetting or excusing harmful behavior. Perhaps most importantly, I had learned that family love is not automatic or unconditional. Like all relationships, it requires ongoing work, clear communication, mutual respect, and accountability. The simple fact of being related by blood does not entitle anyone to trust or forgiveness that has not been earned. It was a harder, more complex understanding of family than the one I had grown up with, but also a more mature and ultimately more satisfying one. Real relationships based on genuine understanding, rather than idealized images or obligatory roles, may be more difficult to maintain, but are ultimately more rewarding. As I settled into my apartment that night, I felt a sense of peace I had not experienced in a long time. The betrayal would always be part of my story, a scar I would carry. But it no longer defined me or my family relationships. We had all grown, changed, evolved. We had found a way forward, not back to what was before, but toward something new that honored the painful truth of our shared experience. And in that truth, however difficult it had been to face, there was a kind of freedom I had never known before. Have you ever experienced a moment that completely changed how you saw someone close to you? A betrayal or revelation that forced you to reevaluate a relationship you thought you understood? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that healing is possible, even after profound betrayal. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that sometimes our most painful experiences can lead to our greatest growth. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.